Thanks for the introduction. Oh, yeah, let's actually plug you into you for now, because I think you have a better one. Can you start QuickTime so we can record that as well? I guess, so there are two options that we have for people that we can go over today. So we can either do something which is kind of a better overview for people who aren't too familiar with Firebase, like what's new with Firebase, or if people have laptops ready and are interested in kind of doing a code lab and walking through some of the cool stuff that we can do with ML and like facial recognition, we could do that instead. Let's do a vote and make this really democratic. So who would like to just kind of learn a little bit more about Firebase and like what's going on with Firebase? Cool. And then ML kit, ML new stuff. Sorry guys, you are the minority. Okay, so let's do what's new and dig in there. So I can tell you a little bit about what Firebase is. Whoa, that's a bright light. To start with while we do that. Let's see. Are my slides not loading? Still, yeah, they're taking a while. Sweet. Okay, so Firebase is a developer platform that is owned by Google that helps mobile developers build their apps, grow their apps, and maintain the stability of their apps. So what does that actually mean? That's a lot of words. So we have a bunch of tools and services and libraries that work cross-platform, iOS and Android, and a lot of them have web support, though not all of them, to help you do things like manage authentication, handle storage, handle things like in-app messaging, or, as I mentioned earlier, machine learning and ML kit. So that's kind of Firebase as an overview. Let's talk about some of the cool new things that we've just eventually. Technology is really complicated, guys. Let's see. Sweet. Yeah. Okay, then. Yeah, and let me try to start recording this guy. Blah. Sorry, they asked us to record this so they can do something exciting with it, I suppose. Perfect. Can I have you drive it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Sorry, there are a lot of slides. We announced a lot of new things here, so it's taking a little bit of time to load. But so recently, so on Monday, we had something which is called the Firebase Summit. This is something that we do every year, and we have it in Europe because, have you guys heard of Google I/O? Yeah. So Google I/O is over in Mountain View, which is cool if you live in the Bay Area, but really hard if you don't. And so every year we try and host a summit over in Europe. Last year was Amsterdam, this year was in Prague, to try and help some of the European developers who are pretty much a significant part of our developer group anyway, so we want to actually make sure we can talk to people and engage with people. So maybe let's not do present mode just because this is taking too long. There we go. Try that again. Screw that. We're not going to do that anymore. Okay, we're just going to go through this directly. Let's start from the beginning. Okay, so what's new in Firebase? So this is what I was saying before, right? So we help in like 3 parts of the lifecycle of your app. Are most of you folks mobile developers? No? Okay, what are you if you're not a mobile developer? What type of development do you do?
React Native.
React Native, so we also have a bunch of React Native support too. We don't build that ourselves, we partner with another team that does it, but we work really closely with them to get that. So we're still helping you, don't worry. But so we help on 3 different parts of the life cycle. So we first start with building your app, right? When you're actually first creating your app, we help you do things, as I said, like we help you do auth, we help you with storage, we help you even hosting if you need a CDN and you need to do a lot of asset management. But then that's not like that's the first challenge when you're building an app, right? But when you have an app that's actually running, the last thing you want to do is push a release and then have a bunch of crashes and have everyone give you a 1-star rating and then never recover from that, because we've all been there, it's really painful. So we have things which help you monitor your stability and improve app quality. So we have things like Crashlytics, which helps you, so getting crash stack traces from mobile clients is actually sometimes a little bit hard, especially if you're using obfuscation, which you should be, and if you're not, please do. So we help you automatically generate crash reports and unobfuscate them so you can actually see what's going on in the wild, and you don't have to reproduce things, try and reproduce it on your own dev machine, which can be impossible, especially if you're working with the Android ecosystem. We also have things which do like performance monitoring and something called Test Lab, which works for both iOS and Android. We have a bunch of different devices sitting in a data center, many data centers, and you can go through and do a bunch of automated UI testing on all kinds of different devices with different operating systems and different configurations to hopefully run into bugs before your customers do. And then finally, a really important part is actually growing your business, right? It's one thing to build something and have a few people like it, but you want to actually get people to, you want to become that viral app, that next Snapchat, right? So we have things where you can track your users' behavior in the app using analytics. We have things where you can help people invite their friends with dynamic links and also manages deep linking. You have things which help you do A/B testing, so you can actually try out different experiments, try out different experiences for your users and see what people are going to like. So there are a lot of products, so hopefully some of them will be helpful. But yeah, so let's talk about the things that we've launched recently. So yeah, let's go there. Perfect. Yeah, so what's new on the things that help you build your app, right? So Cloud Firestore. Oh, there are a lot of notes there.
Okay, maybe there's a way to make.
We can try present it again. Yeah.
Yes.
It was
F11 or something like that.
No. So we tried it. It was just hanging last time. It was this screen of death.
No, I mean.
Whoa! 10th times the charm. That might be it too. Like I said, there are a lot of slides here, so we're not exactly helping anybody. So Cloud Firestore is a kind of a document store that we have. And it handles a very, very high QPS, so it's very scalable. But the fun, interesting thing that we've added recently are security rules. So security rules are how you can control which of your unauthenticated devices, right? Because we're talking about mobile development. You're not talking server to server. You're talking a device that could be out in the wild, and it could have been hacked. It could have been controlled by a bad actor. We want to make sure that those people, we're ensuring only the right people can write to the right documents. So we have these new rules, which now what we do is we have a way of testing that the rules that you're pushing are actually working, right? Because if you're putting a security rule out there and you're saying, hey, I don't want to give access to X, Y, and Z, and you push it and you were wrong, you've now blocked traffic to all of your users, which is a disaster. So we now have a way you can actually test this in the console. So it's really fast. It's a local testing. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah, answer, potentially.
What about automated testing? What if you want to test this rule? This is some configuration, Firebase specific code, right?
Yes.
So, and eventually it's still is a part of your business, of the business logic of your application. And then you have some test suites on your application, and then you want to run continuous integration practices. You want to run your test suites when you build new versions, new revisions of your application, and then you might want to run Firebase specific tests automated as well. So is there any way to do that?
So I actually didn't ask him to ask that question, but I have a really great answer for you, so thank you for asking that. We've recently announced a bunch of emulators. And so what the emulator does is it runs locally, and it takes all of the configuration that you have, and now you can use it for CI, you can use it for automated testing, because you give it credentials and you give it the configuration that your production system will have, and then you can say, okay, run these tests, but run them locally. So yes, we do have that, mainly because yes, that is some automated testing and integration testing or something that we very strongly believe in and believe in the value of. That's why we even have things like test labs. So we definitely want to make sure all of our developers have it too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But yes, so again, I think a lot of these are very specific if you've used Firebase before. So there are cool new things, but I don't think it's necessarily relevant for those of you who haven't seen it before. You can sort things, which I'm sure you expect to be an automatically standard thing. So we'll just move past that guy for a sec. The interesting thing is, so Firestore, which is I think it's our newest and fastest storage system that we have, right? But we only used to offer it in the US. And obviously this was a problem for most of Europe because of various GDPR and privacy rules. So now we have a new deployment region in Germany, and we're adding a bunch more in Europe, kind of coming soon, which hopefully will be helpful for you guys. Yeah, this is again, so Firebase has, so have you guys heard of Google Cloud Platform? Yeah, cool. So Google Cloud Platform and Firebase work really well together. So Google Cloud Platform is more designed for people who are back-end engineers who are using it as like servers and as infrastructure, right? But what Firebase does is it helps people who maybe don't want to worry about servers, they're more mobile developers, connect and use some of the infrastructure that cloud provides in a really easy way from devices without having server-to-server authentication and things like that. So have any of you guys played with cloud storage on Google Cloud Platform? I'm seeing some nods, which is cool. Also, thank you for putting your hands up. I can see those more easily. So now what we're doing is we have a way of importing and exporting between our version, which is Cloud Firestore, which is built on top of GCP, and the cloud storage. So now if you have clients who are using Cloud Firestore, you can import and export the data so that you're using the exact same storage as you are with your server-to-server interactions. So we're just making that connection between Firebase and GCP a little bit easier, because our intention is if you're using Firebase, you don't necessarily have to manage these servers yourself, because Firebase provides onboarding tools that handle that kind of scaling, that management for you. Sweet, yeah. Do you want to dig into functions?
Sure.
Hold on, let me give you a mic. I'll take a break.
So Cloud Functions is it's kind of the way we stitch together all of the various Firebase products. So like it lets you run little JavaScript functions in Google data centers. So if you have an event that goes off in Firestore, like someone changes a document, you can then wire that up to a function and have it send a new config to your UI so that it displays a different part of your app. It's basically a way to help you be sure that you can be completely serverless and not rely on kind of a mix and match.
I think also, since we are using, like we're quite, I'm going to stand up because I can't. Too short. So the nice thing about Cloud Functions is that we're using a lot of the, so people like to say something is at Google scale a lot, but it is kind of a real thing where we're used to like massively spiky traffic, where suddenly you go from no QPS to like millions of QPS, and just like over the course of a minute, right? And so Cloud Functions, and Cloud Functions for Firebase in particular, is capable of handling those spikes as well. So it only kind of spins up instances as you're getting that traffic, and it spins them down as soon as you're not. So you're not paying for compute that you don't need, but you still get all of that massive scaling that you're expecting from like GCP. Yeah, sorry.
That's cool. Thank you. Oh, there. Hey, look, it's animated. The new features, Cloud Firestore now has Node.js 6 runtime, and that's a new thing for us. But if y'all are new to the product in general, it's not that big of a deal. And the other thing is that we also have the integration with remote config, which is a product that I alluded to, and we'll talk about it a little more in detail later. But it lets you, on the fly, without needing to download anything or have your users download an update, be able to reconfigure parts of your app in response to events and user like audience profiles and that sort of thing. Yeah. And hosting. Yeah, hosting might actually be relevant to something else since you don't seem to be as mobile developy. Hosting is our way of hosting static web content. So like HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript, and it, like Cloud Functions, is Google scale. So it instead of hosting it at like a single place, it can be right next door, get really fast load times. And it's actually super easy to set up. Fortunately, the way it used to operate used to be a little more difficult to set up because you could only host one site per Firebase project, and that could be a huge pain in the butt if you have, say, a database in one project, but you wanted 3 different websites to run off of that data.
Also, the Firebase projects are the same as your GCP projects. So that's kind of like the conceptual unit of like how all your data is stored. Except now you can do things across it.
Yeah, and well, so now you can just have multiple websites running off that same data without having to create, different projects and worry about different billing and the whole deal. It's all one big package. And this is a graphic that illustrates that.
Delta uploads are nice.
Oh yeah, and the Delta upload. So it used to be whenever you deployed your site from Firebase hosting, you just put the whole thing from your local workstation into the cloud, and that meant that even if the assets hadn't changed, if you hadn't a file, if you hadn't even touched the thing, it would still get uploaded. Now only the files that you change actually get uploaded, which saves you some data and a lot of time. And have any of y'all ever heard of Glitch or StackBlitz? Use them? They're both online IDEs, so I don't know if you've ever tried to use those, but they are super convenient. Let your work follow you over where you need to go. They recently had an integration with Firebase hosting, so you can now deploy your website right from the Glitch and StackBase without ever having to touch a computer. Well, actual computer. Yes.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting about things like the online IDEs is that we actually use them a lot internally. We have something that, because the Google code base is actually too big to fit on any machine, so we have to use these online IDEs. But the nice thing is, it's in your browser, so whenever you never have to have that really painful onboarding where you're setting up a new dev machine, because your IDE is just always set up and it's always there, which is kind of nice. Yeah?
Can you not do this with Vim and SSH? Just SSH to where your code is,
No.
irrelevant.
That's an old way.
So you totally can, but you are SSHing to something, right? And so the nice thing is here, what you do is you have an image, pretty much, right, which then launches and creates this virtual machine that you're using. So the nice thing is, say for example, you go from having, and this might be an amazing problem to have, you go from having 3 developers to having 7,000, right? You'll have to provision something and have that kind of scale a little bit yourself. But since everything is handled in the browser and you have like a virtual machine that's running it, it actually scales really well. And you don't have to now have a machine which can handle that many incoming kind of connections. Mm-hmm. So that is like a very contrived example, let's say. But it's really the idea that you can have a bunch of different IDEs and work environments that are tweaked for different things. Like you don't have to now, say you have a code base which is like a few terabytes, or maybe multiple gigs even. Like you have a bunch of assets. If you wanted to jump between 2 different kind of projects or workspaces, sometimes you can do it with Git, but not when you start getting really big. So then you actually physically have to have different copies of these things, and it gets really painful. But here you don't have to worry about that, right? Because it's not on a single machine. And this actually, because they're all VMs, they can scale really well. So yes, but not always.
Okay, thanks.
So it depends, yeah.
Worth a shot if you want to give either of those a try, basically.
Yeah, and for a lot of the Firebase things, we do provide direct REST access because we know not everyone is a mobile developer, or some people are using React and we haven't necessarily migrated everything there yet. So we do have like actual REST endpoints, but you're getting a lot of benefits if you're using the SDKs if you are doing mobile development. This is the one of the really cool things that we have. Have any of you played around with some of the cloud APIs for machine learning? You have? You have? Some of you have. Okay, so the cloud APIs are awesome, but they require a lot of back and forth, right? There's a lot of handshaking going on, a lot of model management. But what MLKit does is MLKit actually makes these pretty much like you pretty much make a one call, and you can do text recognition, you can do image labeling, landmark recognition. Facial recognition is actually done really well. You can get a bunch of different points when you have a stream of video coming through. So we're really just making it a lot easier for you to do things with machine learning if you don't have a bunch of data scientists on your team, right? We're offloading a lot of the model management, even model updating. You can add your own TensorFlow models if you do have data scientists who are cool at that, but like out of the box, you can do text recognition on images really easily, right? So you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, and this is the one I was mentioning recently, like we just add facial contours. I'm thinking, yeah, so we have CLIs that are really helpful for deploying hosting and function things. I'm trying to think of what would be, because all of these are all the new things. If we can get more into deep diving into one of the tools, that might be better. What do you think?
For the CLI in particular?
Maybe. No, let's just keep going. Oh, this is what we were chatting about earlier. Now we have all these local emulators, so you can run them in CI. And so we have them definitely for our databases. We have certain things for rules as well, and we're just adding more and more of them as we kind of progress through. Yeah, what's new with app quality things? I keep interrupting you. Don't let me interrupt you.
That's cool.
Go for it.
So Firebase Test Lab, as she said, it's our product that we basically have a bunch of actual physical mobile devices sitting in data centers across the world, and you can run a bunch of what they call robo tests, which is just a random monkey action. So it touches random points on the screen and tries to navigate your app and see if it can discover any bugs or any crashes. So it just gives you a little peace of mind when you're launching your app that, because there's so many different ways that you can, Android is huge, right? It's got dozens of different manufacturers and different versions, so it can be sure that your app will work across all of them. And newly, we are actually available on iOS now, so Apple let us put a bunch of their phones in our data centers as well, which is really nice of them. But so it means that you can...
But we're not that good friends.
Yeah.
We're not that good friends yet, but...
We're just happy that we're able to work together that way. But yeah, so if you have an app that's Android or iOS only or works across both, you can now also test that out with the Test Lab. And Crashlytics. Crashlytics is wonderful. So how many of you again were mobile developers?
I think not significant numbers of them.
Significant?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I see you raising your hand slyly over there.
Little shy. It's okay. You're allowed to be a mobile developer. Crashlytics is really helpful for giving you an idea of how your app is actually performing once you launch it. So it can send you alerts if it sees a spike in a certain kind of crash. It can let you know if you have a crash that you thought was resolved, that you'd fixed a bug and it comes back again. And just generally gives you a peace of mind that your app is working as you want it to. One of the big things that we're doing with Crashlytics right now is we're trying to integrate it with as many things as possible, so it works across basically all of your existing tool chains. And one of the parts of that is we have an integration with BigQuery, which is BigQuery is a part of Google Cloud, just a big database that lets you run a lot of, it kind of lets you slice into your data in a more particular way. But it can be kind of tough to manage, so we also put out these templates for Data Stereo and BigQuery that let you kind of out of the box see a good kind of bird's eye of what's going on with your crashes. And the Jira. So
do any of you folks use Jira or Slack or PagerDuty?
Okay.
Are you guys all laughing because of the PagerDuty one? You don't want to be using it, but you're using it anyway. I never wanted to be using it at 2 a.m. But anyway, sorry.
Well, yeah, so those are the 3 new integrations that we launched. So in each of them, any of those alerts that I talked about, if you get a new issue, an issue that's all of a sudden blew up, or one that's recurred, Crashlytics can now send you alerts to either a Slack channel that you designate, or page you if you desire, or raise an issue in Jira. So it just helps you. You don't have to worry about paying attention to Crashlytics itself because it will let you know if something's going wrong. And I think PagerDuty, Perfmon, yes. Do you know more about?
Yeah, sure. So again, I think a lot of these are. So I'm myself a backend engineer, and I actually didn't know that these were very, very difficult problems on mobile until I started working on Firebase. but it's actually very difficult to track latencies on clients, right? So, I mean, so you can have like server request logging, and you can see how have like timers on your server side to see how long something is taking and see how many hops it's making and where the bottlenecks are for like the various databases you're talking to. But it's actually very hard to get that information back from clients, mainly because the client devices are more unreliable. They're not actually instrumented in a way, like the OSs aren't instrumented in a way to actually give that data back to you in a meaningful way, right? So what Firebase Performance does is out of the box, it figures out, okay, it knows what like an activity is on Android. And so it's like, hey, I can see how long someone is spending in certain activities, or if activities are taking a long time to start, or taking a long time to, or are hanging in weird places. And it automatically instruments a lot of these things for you. Just like any good logger on the server side would, right? So that's kind of what's really nice. But the cool thing is you can actually track sessions now, right? And this is something that is sometimes even hard on the server side, right? Especially when you have a distributed system. Because you're saying, okay, this, especially if it's very, very distributed and you have a bunch of load balancers, it's hard to see what actually was the user interaction that led to a certain issue or that caused something to slow down. But here we're saying, let's actually track, because we have a lot of authentication information about the user, we can track a user through all of the things that they're doing. And this is happening on the client side as well. And so we can see, okay, this is what they were doing, this is what caused them to use CPU, and you can actually get a history. So you can say, okay, in this particular case, if they do A, B, and C, then they're fine. But if they in the middle did D, suddenly now everything is going to slow and it's going to hang because you have a memory leak in D, which only impacts you if you're doing A and B. So that's actually kind of cool and very, very helpful to have.
Can I ask?
Yeah, please do.
User can open other applications.
Yes.
So we can
Yes. So that's actually a very good point. So users can't, the device space is interesting, right? Because you're not in, it's a lot noisier of an environment, right? Because they're opening a bunch of different things. Even in a browser, there's a little bit more isolation than you have on the actual phone. So what we try to do, obviously we're not going to say, hey, this other app that they're using on the phone is slowing everything down, because that would be a problem for many reasons. But what we can say is, hey, there is something where like you can see how much you're actually using, how much CPU you're using. You can see if you can kind of get an idea if they're noisy neighbors based on if you're not actually seeing a lot of CPU or memory usage and you're seeing everything slow down, you know there's something weird going on. So it isn't always something in your app, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's not something that you should try and fix, right? Because the end user doesn't care whose app is to blame. All they know is your app is hanging and they can't use it. But yeah, that's a very good point. There are noisy neighbors, especially on devices. Yeah, this is again like there are there's issue management, so you can actually see. For example, this is kind of checking latencies, right? Because you're saying, hey, they're doing a bunch of these sampling. They're saying, hey, this latency spike is beyond a certain acceptable range. Like if you're seeing something hang for more than a second, an end user will actually see that. If it's on the order of a millisecond, maybe they won't notice. It might be fine. There's a little bit more slack on timing on devices because these are all end user visible, right? So milliseconds are actually okay, whereas maybe 200 milliseconds might be problematic on a server. So yeah, so now about growing your app. And this is actually something, so what's kind of interesting is that because, so Firebase does provide a lot of these tools to help you build apps. So the one thing that I've noticed is that there are a lot of people who, maybe they're companies who have a strong web presence, right? They don't necessarily have an app, but they're realizing that in order to engage with their end users, they have to have some kind of mobile presence, right? Just something that's getting kind of that brand awareness with their end users because they're seeing them every day and doing some interaction. So that's, I've seen a lot of people who aren't necessarily mobile developers who are leaning heavily on Firebase as a mobile platform to help them get ramped up into mobile development. But anyway, I digress. Going into how you can grow your app. So this is about how to re-engage with your end users, how to make sure that they're not kind of abandoning your app, and how to make sure that they're sharing it with their friends. It's going viral, they're happy to use it, and they're spending a lot of screen time there. Again, I mentioned we have some pretty good analytics tools that are instrumented out of the box. We do things like session timing, when we've last seen a user, so you know if it's alive or not. It's basically like a heartbeat, but you can see, you can target people based on if they haven't shown up in the app in 3 days, or if you saw them yesterday, or this is something where when you're segmenting users, it's always nice to be able to say, hey, I want to know who is currently at a level 5, whether they were ever at level 5, or so you want to have two distinctions, right? I want to have one where I say, hey, anyone who's ever beaten level 5. Maybe that's a group, and that's a set of people. But I also want to know people who are stuck on level 5, and so that's what dynamic audiences are. It's new. If you haven't played with audiences before, it's not necessarily relevant. But yeah, and it's just about giving people a little bit more. So audiences are how we target our users to engage with them, right? This is how you segment them. This is how you kind of cluster them into groups. So we want to give more options for how you can do that, so you can be sure that it's really fitting the definition of a user segment that you actually care about. That's stuff. Ooh, predictions is interesting. So this is actually using some of the machine learning models that we have internally and trying to expose it to developers and make it a little easier to use. So analytics that I was just talking about, what analytics does is it tells you what users have done, right? They triggered an event, they hit a level, they ran into a crash. Those are things that they've done in the past. Predictions tries to say, based on stuff they've done in the past, what are they likely to do in the future? Are they likely to spend money in your app based on a bunch of criteria? Are they likely to churn or to leave your app? So do you want to re-engage with them because of that? So it's one of those things where you turn it on, out of the box, you get this stuff. It's kind of handy. And again, as Shannon was saying, everything is now something that you can export to BigQuery. Mainly because the idea is people are doing interesting things with their data, and we want to make sure that since it is your data, you get it. And in BigQuery, you can do whatever kind of analyzing you want on top of it. And again, as Shannon mentioned, remote config is something where, so you know, on servers, feature flags are an exciting thing, right? When you're turning on a feature and you're rolling it out, it's actually very. I'm teaching you guys a lot about app development. I'm sorry, I feel like a lecturer. So it's hard. So when you ship a version of a product to the app, it's actually non-trivial to have a feature flag in it, right? That's controlled and gating the logic, like a new feature that's being rolled out. Because you actually have to have it installed on their app. You can't really roll back a node the way you can if you're deploying a new feature on a backend service. So remote config lets you do that because you have everything instrumented in your app, and you just start turning it on by percentages. So 10% of your users now start getting B instead of A. But yeah, so that's what remote config is, and that's what it does really well. Yeah, this is. Have you ever had someone roll out a feature that wasn't meant to be rolled out and not know who did it? No one's ever had that problem? Okay, so well, it's a problem that some people have run into. So now you have change history, so you can see what changes happened to your feature flags and when they happened. Let's see. And again, everything integrates with Cloud Functions. Cloud Functions is our nod to serverless, right? Because it scales, you don't have to actually manage your servers yourself. You just have snippets of code that kind of run on demand. And so everything integrates with that. This is kind of like some validation testing that you can do in console, so you don't have to worry about shipping something that's going to break. A/B testing, again, this is just we offload a lot of the stats. We try to offload a lot of the statistical modeling for users, so they can actually say, hey, is something actually making a difference in revenue? Right? Between these two variants, are you actually seeing a difference, or is it actually statistically insignificant? Has anyone ever used push notifications on Android? You guys are just not paying attention. You've all used push notifications, or maybe iOS, either way. So Firebase Cloud Messaging is the way to do push notifications on Android, and we also work on iOS. So the idea is that you can send messages from a console. You don't actually have to ship new versions of your app or programmatically hit an endpoint. This is mainly designed for people who... So have you ever had a PM or a marketing person spend a lot of developer time because they want to craft this perfect message to send to a user? It's kind of annoying. Sorry, I'm a developer. I'm speaking from the developer point of view. It can be kind of annoying. So it's not. So what Firebase does is it has a console UI so that you don't actually have to. You can just provide that to your marketing team, and they can run campaigns at their leisure. Right? They don't need to send something to a JSON endpoint. They don't need to know anything about JSON or endpoints. They can just use it from something where it's very WYSIWYG. They have a UI that they can manage. They can see the images, and they can kind of go from there. So that's convenient. There's analytics and reporting. In-app messaging, there's this exactly the same thing where you don't want to have to ship assets constantly to your app. So we actually handle that for you for new campaigns, marketing campaigns, like saying if there's a sale for autumn or if there's like a security update that you want people to actually make sure they download the latest version of something. Or in this case, you want people to actually share and kind of try and get some of that viral growth going. Sweet. So that's what's new, and obviously it's what's new, and what's new is not necessarily as helpful. I want to open it up to questions though, for you folks. What are some issues you're running into in development, and we can see if there's something we can do to help.
I'm gonna assist you, but if there's a lot of questions.
You're so optimistic. Yeah, please do.
So if we start using Firebase, actually in the trend of losing customers, we will jump over to Google. So how we can avoid it?
Sorry, I don't think I follow. So if we go to Firebase.
Yes. So we share our customer base with Google.
Oh, so what's interesting is actually Firebase, we don't own any of that data. It's all yours. We actually, so there's nothing that Google does with that data. We don't actually have access to it as Google. Only the developer itself has access to it. The user base is not something that we have access to. There are actually hard separations between the two, and you can't join information. So I would recommend you take a look, if you're interested in this one. So the data sharing agreements that we have, it's only about usage data, mainly for metrics and analyzing product health. But you can take a look there, and we specify exactly what parts of your data we have access to and how we use it. And that's in the terms of service when you create your Firebase project to begin with. Yeah, and it's the exact same thing as with GCP, right? It's not, your data is your data, and that's why you're paying for it, right? It's a charge model.
Yeah, but it's spread through Google to competitor.
Sorry, it's what through Google?
Spreads through Google to competitor.
No, there's isolation. There's no contamination between. There's nothing done in aggregate across. Yeah. Not with Firebase.
Another one.
What happens if someone DDoSes your app?
If someone...
If DDoSes distribute
the keys and stuff,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's actually a really interesting one. Because as we all know, those keys are not secure at all, right? So the intention, especially with things like security rules on Firestore, is that first of all, you can obviously rotate the keys. That's really easy and painless to do through the console as a default. But in that interim, before you've actually noticed, there are a lot of, so the security rules actually enforce that just because they have that key doesn't mean they can access data willy-nilly, right? They can only access data that's scoped to that particular user. So even if they have the key, they already have to have created a legitimate user, and they can only access that user's space.
Well, what if they ask the same information for like billions of times in a second?
Well, I mean,
Is there going to be a big invoice on Monday?
that's a very good question. So it depends on what they're using it for and how you've set up your quota management.
Now the question is about DDoS or...
Exactly.
It's not about the data breach, it's about the
Who's paying?
vulnerability mitigation.
Exactly.
Getting
And
Google down. Just
so I think so Google infrastructure gets hit by a lot of DDoS attacks and doesn't necessarily get hit all the time. So I think that scalability isn't an issue. But the question about who gets charged is an interesting one. So there are a lot of quota enforcements and kind of alerting that we have when we're seeing unusual spikes in behavior. And historically, if there is a crazy, unusual spike in behavior, we have worked with developers to shut that down fast and make sure it doesn't impact them.
What if it happens on a weekend and you're...
We don't sleep, dude. No, we're on call 24/7. Yeah, no, weekends don't matter.
I mean, like, my guys are sleeping, so...
He's sleeping.
Yeah. Well, we have anomaly detection, and we'll get in touch with people. And like I said, even if we can't gate it immediately, we've worked with developers.
So you shut it down?
We don't shut things down without your permission.
Okay. So just you let the one user continue to abuse the filter. Maybe I configured it wrong.
No. It depends. So there are a lot of things that there are per user quotas that you can set for a lot of things. And so obviously, if that user is going beyond quota, they're just going to have their access shut down, right? So it depends on how you configure it and what service you're talking about.
Okay. So there's actually a more difficult question, which might be difficult for you to answer. How's the cost-wise? Is Firebase meant for more for someone who's prototyping a new app, and then when they get enough money, they just quickly do their own infrastructure? Because how's the cost? I don't know.
That's a really good question. It depends on what particular thing you're using it for. But there are a lot of customers who are using us and not in a prototype kind of manner, right? And I think you'll see a lot of. I think the companies I have in mind are the ones that we were mentioning at the Firebase conference on Monday. So things like Hotstar, which is like the largest cricket watching thing in India.
Are they just vendor locked, or did they choose to be there?
That's a really good question. So.
You have only good questions.
I know.
I have lots of questions.
Yeah, best questions. So one of the things that we're trying to, so vendor lock doesn't actually help us, because then people, when they're starting new things, won't join, right? Because if they're just trapped because they're trapped, that doesn't help anybody. So we're actually doing a lot of things, and like Shannon was mentioning with like BigQuery export. So your data is your data, and you can always get it out. So we try not to make it so you feel trapped, because like I said, that doesn't help anybody. In a lot of cases, though, we just have a service which works painlessly and doesn't require maintenance to start, right? So yes, it is true that someone could say, hey, especially in the case of Firebase, a lot of the stuff that we're doing, like authentication, kind of storage and management and hosting, these are not things that have never been solved before. We just do them better and we do them cheaper.
That's the reason why I stopped offering email to my clients 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Google does bad.
Exactly. And you shouldn't care about, we'll go to the next one. You shouldn't care about doing things which are not your core business, right? Why are you wasting, even if you have resources, why are you wasting time doing that instead of kind of actually pushing forward on what makes your app or your company different and interesting?
Say you're like a large company, like the one you mentioned, you want to move, but you can't do it overnight. You have to like take a service and move that. You can't get your data, but switching over is hard. Can you switch over incrementally to or from Firebase, like part of that is by Firebase, part of that is your own infrastructure?
Yeah, for a lot of things. There are things that work well together, some things that are a little bit harder, but for a lot of things people can shift over. Like especially auth is a great story. People can have their own auth story and still use Firebase really well. Yeah.
Hi, I'm interested. Firebase usually is intertwined with Google Play services, and now I think Google allows Android devices to exist without Play services after some European Union allows it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested. Will Firebase work without Play services, or is it planned to work without it?
That is I don't have an answer for you on that one. I know.
Anyways, it's working on iOS, so technical.
Yeah, there are obviously places where it doesn't work with Google Play services, as you mentioned, iOS. I think a lot of our analytics still, a lot of our interesting analytics still require Play services, mainly for validation and security reasons. So I don't know if we're planning on having something which doesn't require it on Android.
I don't know the question.
Okay, so I know Firebase right now, Firestore right now is in beta. So are there any significant changes that I should be expecting in the nearest future?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think. So there are a lot of improvements that we've been making to Firestore. especially with around like scalability, reliability, all the things that you would expect from a GA product, right? In terms of massive changes, I don't think that's our focus right now. It's more just getting it up to snuff so we can actually say that it has it can be used with the same kind of like SLOs that we're comfortable with other products that are GA.
One more question. For now, you have such awesome tools like error reporting, alerting, and all this stuff, but it's built to Android things. Are there any same stuff for maybe JavaScript or other areas where Firebase are using? Because I know that there are many people who are using Firebase as a chat server backend or something like this. Are there any such stuff there?
So I know that the crash reporting, I'm trying to think if the crash reporting has a web SDK and web support.
No.
I don't think it does. Yeah. But that being said, I think getting crashes from web apps is a little bit more of a well-known, well-solved problem. So it's not as challenging, which is why I think we just haven't gotten into that space. In terms of, I think our primary focus has really been iOS and Android. So not just Android, but iOS and Android. So mobile development, mainly because it's harder and people have struggled more with it and people have had more problems getting it to work right. I know there has been a renewed focus on web, but I'm not sure entirely what products have the right web coverage. I think a lot of the because I know FCM, which is like that push notification, that has a good web SDK. Auth has a good web SDK, but I'm not so sure about the error and analytics reporting. Because there is Google Analytics, which does web analytics really well, and that's slightly different than Google Analytics for Firebase, which does the mobile side. But yeah, so not a helpful answer, but I know that there is a listing of all of the SDKs and what platforms they're supported on the Firebase page.
Cool. We'll take a look. Thank you.
I think that's it for the questions. You can, if you have any more questions, then you're welcome to ask them in private session. So we will then do a short break, I suppose,
Sure.
and then we proceed with the part 2 of.
Oh, so we didn't do the code lab. So if we had been doing the code lab, I think we would have had 2 parts. Instead, we just had 1.
Okay, so I think then this is it for.
Yeah, or if there are more questions people have that are not specifically to Firebase, we can try helping out there. But I think that might be. It looks like people are getting a little bit quiet now.
Yep. So thank you guys so much.
All right.